An uneasy truce between Israel and Hamas held tenuously this week. Israeli forces said they killed 3 militants near Gaza's ceasefire line. Palestinian officials countered that dozens of Gazan civilians have been killed by Israeli fire since the October 10th truce, reports that underscored how fragile the calm remains. In the occupied West Bank, video footage showed Israeli troops fatally shooting 2 Palestinians in Jenin after they appeared to surrender during a raid, an incident sharply condemned by Palestinian leaders. U.S. and regional leaders continued diplomatic efforts. Pope Leo traveled to Turkey and Lebanon for talks on peace and interfaith dialogue. In Brussels and beyond, security and economic issues were in focus. At a Russia-led summit in Kyrgyzstan, President Vladimir Putin said a draft peace plan proposed by the U.S. and Ukraine could be a basis for a future settlement, but insisted Russia would keep fighting if a deal wasn't reached. Turkey's president said any international reassurance force for Ukraine would depend first on a ceasefire. Turning to finance, Portugal's minority government won parliamentary support for its 2026 budget, which aims for modest growth and a small surplus. In France, President Macron announced major renovations at the Louvre. From 2026, the museum will charge higher entry fees for visitors from outside the EU to help fund a capacity expansion. Extreme weather caused devastation. Tropical storm Senyar brought a week of torrential rains across Southeast Asia. Sri Lankan authorities said Cyclone Ditwa killed at least 46 people there, with many more missing, as flash floods and landslides swept through central districts. Thailand reported at least 87 deaths in floods across its southern provinces, with 3.5 million people affected. In Sumatra, Indonesia confirmed nearly 100 dead in flood and landslide zones. Nearby, a high-rise fire in Hong Kong turned deadly. Officials say the death toll has reached 128, with roughly 200 people still unaccounted for. 3 men linked to the building's renovation company were arrested on suspicion of manslaughter amid allegations that unsafe construction materials fueled the blaze. Violence and politics intertwined. In Syria, state media reported an Israeli strike on a militant-held village in the south, killing fighters. Israel said its troops were fired upon during a raid into Syria and returned fire. Jordan's foreign ministry publicly demanded that Russia stop recruiting Jordanians to fight in Ukraine, after learning 2 citizens were killed fighting for Moscow there. Displaced Palestinians in Gaza's south also grappled with torrential rains and flooding, and aid groups warned of growing humanitarian needs. A shocking crime in Washington, D.C. drew attention. 2 West Virginia National Guard members were shot and critically wounded near the White House during a targeted ambush, officials said. The Afghan suspect was shot and captured at the scene. President Trump denounced the attack as terrorism and ordered additional security measures. In policy, the U.S. State Department directed diplomats to press Latin American governments to curb migration, reflecting a hard line on mass migration. The administration also announced it will end temporary protected status for about 353,000 Haitian migrants by February 3, 2026. Mexico's Senate approved the resignation of its attorney general amid criticism over crime rates. In Peru, ex-President Martín Vizcarra was sentenced to 14 years in prison for corruption, a landmark ruling in the country's long fight against graft. Political turmoil and conflict dominated news. In Guinea-Bissau, the army declared a Major General, Horta Inta I, as interim leader after a coup that ousted President Umaro Sissoko Embalo. Embalo later flew to Senegal after soldiers took over the government. In war-torn Sudan, Doctors Without Borders, MSF, said it evacuated an MSF hospital in Darfur after a stretcher-bearer was killed by stray gunfire. The Zalingay hospital, now under paramilitary control, was deemed too unsafe for operations. In Tunisia, a court jailed 40 opposition figures, including politicians, businesspeople, and journalists, for terms up to 45 years on charges of plotting against the state. In a parallel development, Tunisian authorities unexpectedly released prominent lawyer Sonia Dahmani, a critic of President Sayed, after 18 months in detention. raising hopes for easing political repression. World financial markets saw modest gains. European stocks were up on growing expectations that the U.S. Federal Reserve will cut interest rates soon. London's StoxX 600 index rose about 0.2%, led by defense and tech sectors. Traders said rate cut bets surged this week, with U.S. futures pricing an 85% chance of a Fed cut in December. The dollar was steady. The euro traded near 1.1593 after data showed Eurozone inflation hovering around 2%, suggesting no further ECB rate cuts are needed. In Asia, South Korea's central bank kept its benchmark rate at 2.50%, hinting the era of rate cuts may be ending amid a sharp won depreciation that could stoke inflation. Meanwhile, the Bank for International Settlements, the central bank of central banks, warned that highly leveraged trades by hedge funds in global government bond markets pose new financial risks. BIS chief Pablo Hernandez de Cos urged tighter oversight, including central clearing of bond trades and minimum collateral haircuts to curb debt market volatility. In China, October data showed a slowdown. Industrial corporate profits fell 5.5% from a year earlier, after surging in prior months, highlighting weak domestic demand. Beijing has signaled more stimulus to boost consumption, but analysts say growth remains sluggish. Innovation and research drew attention. IBM and Cisco announced a partnership to network quantum computers over long distances, with a goal of demonstrating a working quantum internet by around 2030. In Brussels, the European Commission proposed delaying parts of its AI Act until 2027 and simplifying privacy rules under industry pressure. New World Meteorological Organization data warned that 2025 is on track to be among the hottest years on record, as global greenhouse gas concentrations hit new highs. Solar activity lit up the skies with auroras last week. Scientists noted that strong geomagnetic storms like these can disrupt satellites and power systems on Earth. Meanwhile, Nobel-winning scientists warned that cuts to public research funding could cripple future scientific progress, even as some governments have begun reversing pandemic-era budget cuts to universities.